Hi there, and welcome to this, the Rethinking the Human Factor, with me, your host, Bruce Hallis. And today we have an amazing guest on the show. Now, this guest was somebody that was flagged up to me by chief executive that I was having a chat with, who has said, look, I've listened to a lot of what you've been saying around the human factor, and it's sort of resonating with me with something that I've been hearing from somebody else who has this great podcast. And I was like, great podcast? And he goes, yeah, this is like got somewhere in the region of 25 million downloads. So I was like, no way, 25 million downloads, that's really put me to shame. And then he said, yeah, and it comes out every week. And I was like, that's important. Getting it out consistently is really, really important. It's really important for message. And I said, so who is it? And he said, well, this guy's called Terry O'Reilly. And I was like, okay, I've never heard of Terry O'Reilly. And he said, well, go and check him out. And I did. And a significant amount of time later, having listened to a really large number of episodes, because I think Terry's been doing this for, I think, maybe 10 years. I'm not sure. He'll confirm. I was like, this really resonates with a lot of what I'm talking about in terms of when I think of security as a product, how would you market it? And that is the term that we're hearing a lot of within the security industry. So I asked Terry if he could come on a show. He's actually on holiday and he's joining us on the show, which is completely blown me away. So yeah, Terry, great to have you here on the show.
Well, it's great to be on your show, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
Now, tell me, is the holiday really bad and that justifies you coming on the show? Or is it just a case that, you really wanted to come on the show even though you're having a great holiday?
No, the holiday's going great, and I don't mind at all. It's kind of a working holiday anyway for us. We're just sort of moved into the sunshine and brought our laptops with us. So I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. There's something I still remember when I was at school. And the teacher used to say, let's take you, shall we take the class outside? Because the sun was out, which obviously in the UK is a rarity. So there was this like, let's take the lessons outside. And so in a way, you're definitely sort of enjoying the sun, whereas me here in the UK, it's a little bit cold and damp at the moment. So yeah, never mind. So Terry, look, can you just share with us, who you are, what's the journey that you've been on? Because it has been a really exciting one.
I think the biggest definition of my career is that I've been in the advertising and marketing business. Next year will be 40 years in that industry. So it's what I've always loved. It's what I've always done. I began my career as a copywriter in some of the top advertising agencies in Canada. And then in 1990, I co-founded a production company called Pirate Radio and Television, which created sound and music for radio and television commercials. Then I'd say the next big beat would be in 2005, I pitched a radio show idea along with a friend of mine to the CBC and that idea was to create a radio show about the marketing industry, to give listeners a sense of how the marketing industry works from the inside, because we were working practitioners of advertising. Mm-hmm. The CBC took that show, which surprised us. That was in 2005. And then we started podcasting the show. We're probably one of the podcast pioneers, I would say, because we've been podcasting now for over 10 years. And that's where we are right now. So I am really a career ad man.
Ah, right. And on the podcasting side, just out of interest, you were there right at the beginning. Why do you think podcasting really works?
It has changed our entire radio show in so many ways. I think the greatest thing about podcasting was it was sort of like Netflix. It was audio on demand. In other words, you didn't have to be sitting in front of your radio at 11:30 on Saturday morning to hear my radio show anymore. You could actually be anywhere at any time and put it on. And I think that access to audio was so appealing to so many people. And with the emergence of mobile phones and smartphones, it was just so portable. So I think that was what changed. And as you were saying earlier in your wonderful introduction, the amount of people who listen to our show worldwide is astounding to me. We just got some research in from the CBC, and it showed that in the last quarter, so the last 4 months, we had over 3 million listeners around the world. That's outside of our own market. And that's astounding to me when you go down the list and see that there's people in, Turkey listening to you, and Russia and Brazil. And, it's just an astounding thing. Podcasting has changed our world.
And it's really interesting because when you think about podcasting, you think, okay, it's in English. You speak English, so you think it must really appeal to only those who have a pretty good grasp of English. And I guess the reason why I'm picking up, one of the challenges we do face that my community faces, they create content, and normally the organizational policy says our language for our global organization is English. But actually, a significant majority of the employees in the organization, it's not their first language. It's potentially not even their second language. It's probably a language they don't really get to grips with, and it's a lot harder to listen to. So, why do you think podcasting is able to get over that barrier of the listener in Turkey or in Russia whose English might not be that good and definitely isn't their first language?
That's a very interesting question. I have to assume, Bruce, that those listeners in those countries are probably English speaking, right, or have a huge faculty for understanding English. I'm sure that, it has to be the case. Otherwise, they wouldn't be listening. I also have to say this. I think my cadence, because I'm not a fast talker, my cadence is easier to understand than maybe some other podcasts. And the reason I say that is I get many emails from English as a second language students saying, I'm learning English. I love your podcast. I listen all the time. So there's something about the way we either put together the podcast or my pacing or articulation or whatever it might be that seems to appeal to people who are, have a slight or are learning the English language. So that might be part of it.
And I think that's really good. And I'm just going to pick that out for our listeners. That I think it's a really important point. I recognize that one of the challenges that I personally have is that sometimes I speak too quickly, which is fine if English is your first language. But if it's not, then I think the challenge then, because people aren't able to keep up and to sort of process what they're hearing. But that was one of the things I first remembered about listening to your podcast was the speed and the clarity of how you speak enables people who aren't native English speakers to be able to process.
Yeah, and for English speakers who want to speed me up, they can always listen to me at 1.5 times. It's always a speed up function. But people do joke about my show, but they will. I love it at 1.5. So yeah. Something for everybody.
I don't know what. If I tried that with me, I might sound quite squeaky. Actually, I suspect. So tell me, Adman. Now, yes. A lot of our listeners would have heard of Adman, probably from the TV series, of the admin. But what is an admin? What is the objective of an admin?
Well, an ad person, an advertising agency, an ad writer, or an ad art director, or an ad strategy person, their job is to try and create a brand or maintain a brand in the marketplace and give it a distinct look and feel. And I always say that amateurs think marketing is all about selling stuff, but the pros know that marketing is all about differentiation, which is making your brand stand out in the marketplace, especially in these days because there's so much competition in every single category. People have so many options in every category. So great marketing, and the job of an ad man is to create distinct branding for a product or company.
Okay. How do you think people make mistakes about differentiating their product or their service in the market?
That's a very interesting question. And I will answer that by saying that one of the biggest mistakes that marketers make, especially small marketers, small to medium companies, is they decide to differentiate their product or business by selling the category benefit instead of what is unique for their company. And by that, I mean, if you're in the detergent business, like if you sold, a clothing detergent, for example, you wouldn't hang your hat on the fact you get clothes clean, because that's the category benefit. Every detergent can say that and should say that. Yeah. What you have to find is your unique place within the category. So, for example, to stay with the detergent detergent category rather. Cheer detergent, I'm sure it was the same over in the UK. Cheer decided at one point, or strategically, that you could use cold or hot water with their detergent. So they positioned their brand as all temperature. meaning you could use cold water instead of hot water, and you don't pay as much for cold water, right?
Yeah.
So their way to find a niche that they could own within the whole category of getting your clothes clean. So again, just to summarize, I think a lot of marketers sell the category benefit in their marketing instead of what's unique about their company. And when you sell the category benefit, you're selling your competitors too. And Bruce, if you're just selling security, you're selling the category instead of your company, right?
Yeah. And I guess that's a challenge for our listeners. I see the parallels with developing a product in so many different ways. So a lot of our listeners will work for organizations that have invested significantly and understandably significantly large sums of money in the form of resources and bringing in external parties to produce. It's a product, but basically it's to produce a range of policies which define what that organization's expectations are of how their employees go about doing their business and how their suppliers that they work with and their contractors do that. So it's almost like it's almost like a product, but the product it's a set of expectations in a document. And for me, I look at it and I go, okay, so there's been an investment in developing the product. And then the next stage is, okay, I need to make my market, my employees, my suppliers, any contractors and third parties that we work with, I need to make them aware of the product. Because if I don't make them aware of the product, then I'm relying upon them just somehow stumbling across the product.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is that something that when you think of your experience, is that something that you can say, I can understand that?
Yes, I can. But again, smart marketing is really about figuring out what area you can own within your category. And especially if you have bigger competitors or competitors with deeper pockets, it's still how can you identify and isolate a unique aspect of your company or your personnel or your wisdom or your experience or your philosophy that you can build a brand around that is uniquely yours. That's still, at the end of the day, that is the exercise.
Yeah. And you're talking about finding that unique thing, and then building your brand around that. Can you just help our listeners understand what you mean when we talk about brand, what the marketeers mean who are in the job of creating brands, just so that everybody that's listening is clear?
Yeah. I think that's a really important question, because you can gloss over that pretty quickly and assume that everybody has the same definition of what a brand or branding is, when in fact people probably have multiple definitions. My definition of what a brand is really simple. To me, a brand, you tell people what you stand for and what you stand against. And I think that's the core definition of a brand. And I think what you stand against is the more interesting aspect of that, because what you stand for will be very similar to your competitors. So if you are a clothes detergent, you stand for clean clothes and ease of use, etc., and low price. But everybody can say that. So that becomes, as someone once said, like the blank tiles in Scrabble. You can use those words anywhere, but they have no value.
Yeah.
What's more interesting, Bruce, to me, is what you stand against, because that makes you a really interesting brand. That makes you three-dimensional. So, for example, Steve Jobs and Apple, he immediately stood against hoarding computing power inside major corporations. That was always their rallying flag, their rebel flag was, we stand against IBM keeping all the computing power away from the individual. And that really defined Apple for all time. And Nike stands against being, inert in your home. Like what Nike's saying by saying just do it is, if you have a body, you are an athlete. So they stand against not being active.
Yeah.
So the best brands in the world give you that message in their branding, meaning here's what we stand for and here's what we stand against. And your brand is not just a logo. Your brand is every touch point you have with your customers. It's your website, it's your signage, it's your business cards, it's your social media accounts, it's what people hear when they're put on hold, when they call your business. Everything should feel like it's coming from the same place. And if I may just expand on that for a second, Bruce, I have a theory which I call my shish kebab theory, which is Everybody knows what a shish kebab is. It's, a piece of chicken, a piece of beef, a tomato, a green pepper, a mushroom, but it's all held together by a skewer.
Yep.
And the skewer is the important aspect of a shish kebab. And I think your marketing is the same principle at work. So you've got your various mushrooms and green peppers. You've got your website, your signage, your social media. Those are all the tasty things on the shish kebab. But the important thing is, it's all held together by a skewer, meaning that everything should feel like it's coming from the same place. Like your logo should smack of your website. Your business card should feel like it looks like your signage. Your social media should have the same tone and sensibility as the print advertising you may be doing. But everything feels like it's coming from the same place. And most small marketers don't do that. Everything feels like a one-off. So there's nobody connecting the dots out in the marketplace.
That's really interesting. Now, I'm going to pick up that last point is something that it's a great metaphor for kebab. I do like a kebab myself anyway, so that's a great metaphor. So the skewer, in effect, is the brand, and then all the different bits on the skewer are the touch points.
Right. And I mean, every touch point. I mean, every smart company should sit in their boardroom and just lay out every touch point they have with their customers, and then look at it all and decide whether that shish kebab, whether the skewer is actually working. Like, if people only see 3 of their 27 touch points, will they all feel like they're coming from the same company? Yeah.
It's funny enough, because that's one of the things when I'm talking with organizations around the human factor within information security, cybersecurity, one of the things I always help people with is, what are your touch points?
Yeah.
Because people create campaigns. So somebody could create a campaign around a fabric conditioner. And so there's the overlying marketing, which is the things you're always expecting, like the adverts on the TV, online, in magazines, wherever. So there's all those type of everything. But then there's this whole range of other touch points, the phone call into the call center, bumping into the person that's doing a demo of the product, in the supermarket, even, the van that drives past with all the conditioner. So, these are all touch points, and these are all opportunities to either get it right or get it wrong.
I absolutely, fully, 100% agree with that. And even when a company is trying to decide on what its core mission is, what it stands for and what it stands against, I often say, if you're struggling to articulate that, try and either, if the founder of the company is still there, still part of the organization, or if the founder is long gone, but his or her principles still exist, that's the moment. The moment the founder slammed his or her fist on the table and said, there has got to be a better way. And when that moment led to a company, that thing, that spark, that reason the company was founded, in that fist slam, is the core of that company.
It's the reason why.
Yeah.
And in a way, this goes back to the point you were making earlier about the for and against. The for is pretty much what every other organization in that brand category is going to be saying.
You still have to hear it, but you can't just rest it all on that.
No. And by actually saying this is what we're against, in effect, what you're saying is, you're rallying people in the market who are also against that to your brand. Yes?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And think of it as an army. Like when an army gets dispatched, they are fighting for something. So I want to know what you're fighting for, because I know what you stand for are the table stakes. But what you're fighting for is what you stand against. You're fighting against something. Let me know what the fight is what's the grit in your brand?
Yeah.
Because you're way more interesting if I know that. You're way more interesting to me if you can articulate that to me.
In my mind, simplicity is really, really important. People don't really have a great deal of time. They don't get a lot of exposure to adverts, for example, to marketing, which is one of the reasons why, if an ad is only 30 seconds long, how much attention do we actually have of the audience, which is why it's really important on every other touch point that we sort of, we're making the most of everyone touch points. So when you add it all together, it really makes some sort of meaningful difference. So on one hand, you keep it simple, but on the other hand, can you have quite complex, the bit that you're against, can that appeal to a very wide audience? And by actually having something that you're against, do you in effect actually say, well, there's going to be a range of people that we're just not going to appeal to?
Yeah, I think you're asking some very interesting questions there. So first of all, time is important, and people do not spend the amount of time evaluating your brand as you wish they would. So you have to know that off the top. That's why I say every touch point should feel like it's coming from the same place, because people will only take away an impression of your brand, not a detailed file. So that's why if everything is consistent, the impression will at least get more vivid. It's not going to be a detailed file. They're just taking away an impression of your brand. I think there are different places where you can go more in depth. A website is a place where you can offer people the chance to take a deeper dive into your brand. A 30-second radio or TV commercial is not the place for a big dive, but it could lead to the website. It could lead to your, if you have, I mean, in this day and age, I don't know if anybody has brochures anymore, but it can lead to other places where there can be more information had.
Yeah.
And then to address that last question you ask about appealing to only a certain segment of the people, I think any brand you really have to know your customer, and you have to identify who your customer is, and it won't be everybody. I mean, if your target is everybody, you haven't done your homework. That's too general, and it's too, it's like appealing to somebody who's 25 with their first home, or appealing to somebody who's 75 moving out of their last home. I mean, it just can't be everybody. So a great marketer has to decide, because nobody has the marketing budget, Bruce, that they wish they had. So you're dealing with a confining marketing budget and a huge target audience. So you have to decide, where is your greatest area of opportunity? In other words, what segment of the marketplace offers you the greatest opportunity to generate awareness, generate revenue, and generate an ongoing customer base? And it won't be everybody. It'll be an aspect of the marketplace.
Yeah. So I guess the challenge within the many of our listeners will be facing is that, say they're responsible for making, as a first step, making sure everybody in their organization of, let's say, 10,000 people, make sure they're all aware of this security project policy we'll call it the information security policy, and we've got to make everybody aware of it. Okay, and actually, there's legislation out there which makes it very clear that that people have to comply and make sure that everybody's aware so that they can do their job. They know what their roles and responsibilities are. So you've got an audience of 10,000 people, and their profiles are all over the place, and they're in different countries all over. And it's almost a sense of, okay, but I'm responsible for making everybody aware. And actually, what all our listeners want to do is they don't want to just make them aware. So there's a tick box and say, yes, we've made them aware. Just like, you can say we ran an ad, and we know that in this space, ad break for this particular episode of this particular series, okay, there'll be 1.5 million people watching the program. And it's a little bit, for our listeners, it's a case of, well, I've got to appeal to 10,000 people. I can't just whittle it down to saying, well, I'm going to make the following percentage of people, 2,000 of them aware, because they're being asked legally, you've got to make sure everybody's aware. But then it's not just about awareness, and I want to increase the chances that they're going to behave in line with that policy, which is a little bit like saying, here's our fabric conditioner. We're marketing it to all these people, to this audience. And actually what we want to do is we want those people in that audience who aren't actually buying the conditioner, we want them to buy it.
Yeah.
And those people that are already buying it, we want them to keep buying it.
Well, let me say this right there, because a great marketing campaign is like a book. It has multiple chapters, and one chapter leads to the next chapter. It's like a great movie is a 3-act play. The first act is setting up the jeopardy. The second act is the complication, and the third act is the resolve, or the end of the story. So I think marketers have to, if you have, let's say you have 3 or 4 different types of target audiences you're trying to reach, you don't try and reach them all with the same ad. Again, you would tailor an ad to a younger audience, and then you would put that ad in the right channels to reach them. And then you would probably create a slightly different piece of communication for a slightly middle-aged audience and use the proper channels to reach them. So my answer is never one ad to reach multiple audiences. It's different chapters in the book.
Yeah. Okay. And so I guess in some ways, I mean, the thing that sort of springs to mind, and you use the phrase category. Now, actually, before I go any further, can you explain what you mean by category to our listeners? Because a lot of our listeners are really, information security professionals. Some of them will have some exposure to marketing, but possibly not to branding, and they'll be internal comms people. So for you, what does category mean? It's just so that we're really clear, so everyone knows what it means. So I think this is a really important point. There's something I really want to pull out from this.
Yeah. When I use the word category, I mean the business you are in. So if you are a detergent, you're in the closed detergent category. If you are a car maker, you are in the automotive category. If you are a computer, if you make smartphones, you're in the smartphone category. So it's the business your company is in. That defines the category. If you're a beer manufacturer, you're in the beer category. Bourbon, you're in the bourbon category, right?
Yeah. Okay. So in effect, I'm just thinking from a sort of, I guess you get categories, and then within the category, you get brands. Yeah.
Yes.
And each one of those brands, based upon what you're saying, their differentiators, the thing, there's things that they're all for, which is the category benefits. And then you get the things that they're all against, and that helps sort of like define, it helps towards defining the brand. It's not the only thing. And so I'm looking at that and I'm going to go, and so each one of those could be a different segment of your market. So security could be the category. Yeah. And then you have your brands which are focused upon the things which people are drawn to in terms of the things that you're against. So
that's right. I mean, if you think of the Apple company, I mean, they have laptop computers, they have iPads, they have smartphones. And to a lot of their customers, those are 3 distinct markets. I mean, some people will only have an iPad, and some people don't ever want to have a smartphone. And there's people who will only work with the laptop, and then there's people like me that would have all 3. So you have different market segments within your brand that you would appeal to.
Can I come back to the question that you said about knowing your customer?
Yeah.
How do marketers normally go about knowing their customer, and how do you think they should go about knowing their customer?
I think that is maybe the most important thing a marketer has to do is really, really, truly understand their customer. So depending on what your resources are, the first and foremost is when you talk to your customers is to ask a lot of questions. If you are lucky enough to be face to face with your customers every day, you've got them standing right in front of you. Ask them about themselves. Why do you choose us? Where do you live? How does this product fit into your life? What do you love about it? What do you hate about it? So if you're face-to-face with your customers, you have this glorious opportunity to ask questions. There are research. You could undertake research to see who your customers are on a grander scale. You can get analytics from websites to see who's visiting your website. You can get analytics from social media to see who's reading your tweets and your posts. But more than anything, you want to identify an audience that you ideally want to reach. And then you should really figure out everything you can about them, meaning their demographics, which is their age and basic income and where they live, and if they're male or female, and do they have a family, etc. And then psychographics, Bruce, is also interesting, where you try to understand their attitudes. So what movies do they go and see? What television shows do they watch? How do they relax? What kind of work day do they experience? So it's really all the intangible things that you can identify, because those are sometimes more revealing than just straight demographics, which are just straight statistics, right?
Yeah. And I think that was leading on to a question I was going to have. What is the better type of data? There's quantitative and qualitative.
Yeah. Well, you probably need a little of both in the marketing world, ideally, because they give you different, viewpoints on a marketplace. So I always say feedback is the breakfast of champions. You need to be curious about your marketplace customers, to want to know more about them and to know how to please them and to try and figure out what the speed bumps are when you're doing business with them, which is a whole other aspect of understanding your customer, that there might be aspects of the way they do business with you that is driving your customers crazy that you are unaware of because you're on the other side of the glass.
Yeah.
So in my company, when I ran my production company, Bruce, I would often ask our clients for 3 things they loved about us and 1 thing they hated. And the reason I structured that question that way was they were often reluctant to tell me what they didn't like about the company. But if I gave them a chance to give us 3 cheers for 3 things they liked, they didn't feel as bad about giving me the thing they hated. And I was most interested in the thing they hated because I wanted to know what it was, because I can't fix it unless I know what it is. So I think asking those kind of questions is a part of the process of learning about your customer base. Yeah.
And do you think that is the sort of, often people get into this habit of doing a survey once every, I don't know, every 3 years. We've had a new strategy come in, and part of that, there is an understanding that we've got to understand something about customer. But does that understanding have to be frequent and consistent?
Yes.
And by frequent, what I mean is the period between doing your first bit of research and then doing your second bit of research, it needs to be less than a year or more than a year. What do you think?
It's probably a case-by-case basis answer to that question. But I think overall it should be consistent, and I think it should have a sense of frequency to it. It might not have to be every 3 months, but I think people change. I mean, look at this marketplace now. We've gone from having this great, I'm talking North America now, this great economy to suddenly the coronavirus kicks in. And I read just this morning that the airline industry is going to lose $113 billion so things in the marketplace can happen instantly that change the dynamics of the marketplace, might change who you can talk to, what your customers are feeling. So I think you want to make it policy that you try and learn about your ever-changing customer base on a pretty frequent schedule.
Now, one of the great things listening to your podcast is often you talk about clients that have engaged you in the past. Now, and these clients have been around sometimes for really quite some time, and it's almost like they're asking you to bring their brand back to life.
Yeah.
And I just want, in my mind, one of the challenges that people who are listeners might have is that, they've just taken on a new job. They're going to be responsible for raising awareness and influencing behavior and embedding security into an organizational culture. But they're not the first person to do it. Security has been around for quite some time in various guises. So there is this brand, and in effect, you're handed a brand when you take on that role. And it's a case of, you might be looking at it going, this brand looks pretty tired. It looks pretty knackered, actually. And our customer base isn't really buying into it. How do you go about understanding, it's almost like a brand audit, a brand, where do you start? For example, people would come to you and say, we've got this brand, it's tired, we want to relaunch the brand. How can you help our brand come back to life to deliver its goals?
Well, you'd have to know what the problem in the marketplace is and what the obstacles are. And then once you evaluate that, Bruce, I think the next decision is it the French evolution or the French revolution? In other words, do you want to do you need a complete brand overhaul, which would be a revolution, or do you want to just evolve into a more contemporary, just really kind of tweak and tune up what was already working but needs a boost? So you would really have to analyze the state of the marketplace and the state of the company relative to the marketplace, relative to your competitors, relative to sales, et cetera, and then make that big decision.
So you'd have to be very clear in your mind what the metrics are, because what you were talking about there is, relative to sales. These are very clear strategic objectives which can be measured.
Right. Not everything can be measured, by the way, and that's one of the falsehoods of marketing, that you can only change what can be measured. And I think that's not entirely true. I think there are a lot of measurable aspects, like sales and margins, et cetera. But your brand equity, the personality of the brand, the personality of the company, and how you creatively express that, and what the value of that is in the marketplace, is very hard to measure. But it's incredibly important. In other words, it's some of the most valuable things on a balance sheet are not on the balance sheet. And that is how people look at your company, how you're positioned in the marketplace vis-a-vis your competitors. What do people say about you when you're not in the room?
Yeah.
That kind of thing you can't find it on the balance sheet, yet it is as critical as sales and revenue and margins.
Do you think you could argue that, in fact, the metrics that we use to measure any form of business or any organization are just purely economic, and that actually all they are is a reflection of the things you can't actually measure? If you get the bits right that you can't actually measure, then the things that you can measure should be looking good.
That's exactly right. It is that kind of funky math. It is exactly that.
Yeah.
Because think about in this era too, Bruce. I mean, you're seeing this big change in the marketplace, and I think this goes for both sides of the ocean, which is we've moved into an era where many people want to know where a company stands in their political beliefs. Like what's the basic political belief of a company? That's something marketers have stayed away from since the beginning of modern marketing. You would never state a political position because would run the risk of alienating half your customer base. But in this new zeitgeist, in this new era that we're now living in, people kind of want to know who they're spending their money with. Like, where do you fall on certain issues? So
what are you against?
What are you against? That's exactly right. So companies are now forced to kind of state their position. And that all of that is the intangibles that will immediately affect the tangibles, right?
Yeah, you use the example of politics, and I do something to look at politics. We've had some big changes here within the UK, within Europe. You're seeing it happen all over the world, but you do often want to look at politicians and go, even though they represent this party that's been around for 100 years, or this party that's been around for 40 years, often the politics reflects the tone of what's going on in society. It's like it reflects, it's a mirror to some degree, what's going on in society. By reflecting that and sort of like taking that and creating your policy around that, you're sort of in effect sort of securing that vote. Arguably,
I'll even take that
the customer.
That's right. I'll even take that a step further. I've often said in my podcast and in the latest book I've written too, I say that the President of the United States dictates the tone of marketing and advertising on this side of the pond. And that sounds like a crazy statement, but it's that you can actually track it. In the Clinton years, President Clinton, when he was president, there was a lot of humor in advertising. If you look back over those 8 years, right. And then when we moved into the Bush years, it got very conservative. All the tone of the zeitgeist got conservative, and so did the marketing. And if you look at the Obama years, humor came back again. A lot of empathy in the marketing. And then when you look at the Trump era that we're living in now, you see. There's very little humor in marketing going on. There's a lot of Some brands are being very brave in stating their political stance. You saw that in some of the Super Bowl advertising over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of risk taking going on now. And that's, great marketing is about being bold, but we're not seeing a lot of bold advertising now. And that's a reflection of the shadow that the president casts over many industries, including marketing.
It's really interesting because one of the things we continually hear within our industry is we talk about organizational cultural change. We talk about the tone has to come from the top.
Yeah.
And in a way, I guess what you're talking about there is the tone coming from the top,
from the most powerful seat in North America, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's an organizational structure. Every country has that.
Yes,
has a structure, and it's almost like sometimes those structures are different, but invariably it's either a leader or a small group of leaders. But there's some sort of it's just like every organization that's out there. Whether it be a charity, a private sector organization, they all have organizational structures. It does come from on the top, but I wrote a blog once about how, because people are just saying it only ever comes from the top down. And you're like, yeah, I absolutely believe that. But also you get a push up.
I want to comment on that because I think that's an important point you're bringing up. I think leaders dictate the tone of any company. And I think it's incumbent upon leaders to constantly articulate what the philosophy and mission statement and values of a company are to their employees. Because every employee has to buy into the mission of the company and has to exhibit the values of the company. So let me give you an example of this, a small example. So David Ogilvy, one of the great admen of all time from England, who started Ogilvy and Mather.
Yep.
He had an interesting philosophy. He had a lot of values he wanted his employees to uphold. And he would constantly communicate them, and this is in the pre-internet age, of course. He would constantly communicate them in memos and speeches and memorandums and just internal communications, because he had something like 200 offices around the world, so he couldn't visit them all constantly, but he wanted to keep them all in the same loop. Mm-hmm. So one of the things he would insist upon, which I find very interesting, it's a very small thing, but it's telling, is he would insist that his people, at the end of meetings, he insisted that his people would walk the clients not just to the elevator, but down to the street and then out onto the street to hail a cab for their clients. And that's an interesting thing to ask, because in New York City, that would be a 20-minute endeavor.
Yeah.
But it's that he didn't want them to just walk them to the elevator. He wanted them to have such class that they would even walk out and hail the cab for the client. And that was his way of saying, let's treat our clients with absolute white gloves at every opportunity we can.
So Uber ruined that then, didn't it?
Yeah.
Or maybe that's just a different way of differentiating something. There's like, we'll either walk you out or you can get an Uber. What type of customer? Customer?
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. That was a competitive advantage to dealing with Ogilvy, right, Bruce? That was when clients got together and spoke about how their agencies treat them. The Ogilvy clients have a story that nobody else would have, right?
And that's what people want.
And that's what they remember. That enhances their impression of you, as I was speaking of earlier, right? That every touch point, even that is a touch point.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And one of your episodes I really enjoyed. Well, I enjoyed all of them. I enjoy them. I've got a list of things that I wanted to ask you, and I know I'm not going. As I wrote the list, I looked at it when we're not going to cover that. Now, the Super Bowl, for me, I was listening to you talk about it, and it only happens once a year.
Yeah.
Okay. But the marketing potential, the potential of that single event is massive. And that was something that you expanded upon in that particular episode. You were talking about how getting it right in the Super Bowl, okay, from a marketing perspective, can have a major impact.
Yes.
And I guess one of the challenges that we have in my industry is that a lot of our listeners will struggle to get more than one shot, one campaign to all the employees to make them aware and to try and influence their behavior. And it seems to me the Super Bowl is an example of it's a one chance in the year that we're giving you to influence this massive audience. Would just share with us some of the stuff that you know about these one-off events like the Super, that just focus on the Super Bowl and the success it brings.
Yeah, the Super Bowl is the largest single viewing event of the year. So it draws in over 100 million and maybe 120 million or more people to watch that one game. So there's nothing else that comes close to that over here anyway. There's nothing that comes close. Probably the next best thing would be the Oscars and the Grammys, but they're pulling in 8 million, 6 million. Like it's a big drop. So that's why it costs, over 5 million American dollars just to secure 30 seconds in the Super Bowl. And that's aside from the production costs of creating a standalone Super Bowl commercial. But here's why that's important is because it's the biggest live audience that event, as I said, in the year. It's the one event that nobody tapes and records. Everybody watches it live. And why that's important is they'll watch the commercials. Because if you tape something, you're going to fast forward through the commercials. But live sporting events, which is why sports is such a valuable marketing category, because nobody really records sports. They really kind of watch it live. And in the Super Bowl's case, it's even enhanced because it is also the Super Bowl of advertising. So advertising agencies, they create ads just for the Super Bowl, big ideas, huge production values. The next day they are rated from 1 to 60, because there's usually about 60 advertisers in the Super Bowl. So they're rated what was the best spot of the Super Bowl, what was the worst. So there's a lot of attention. And even in this day and age, marketers will release their Super Bowl ads about a week ahead of the Super Bowl. So they're actually gaining momentum for the ad even before the Super Bowl happens now. So it is a huge, very expensive undertaking that only major advertisers can really play in because of the expense. Right.
But does it produce results?
Well, that again is a case-by-case basis. There's some ads are so, that tank so terribly that it echoes for years. And then there's ads that are so great that they put a brand on the map. If it's remember E-Trade was a brand new, internet era stock trading company that really established itself with Super Bowl advertising. They did outrageously bold work on the Super Bowl, and that put them on the map. And now they're one of the biggest companies in that category. Coke and the big established brands love to have a presence in the show because it's the biggest place where they get to either launch a new campaign that will be their campaign for the year with the big launch spot. So there's lots of strategic reasons why brands would choose to make that expensive purchase.
So I'm going to just pull us back right to the beginning of your career. Copy.
Yeah.
Now, for me, it is just one of the most undervalued and underrated skills.
True.
People write, but then you have copywriters. I was having a chat with somebody going, look, a copywriter exists for a reason. Okay, good copy is hard to write, but makes a difference. We can all write to a certain degree, but I wouldn't use my own words in any of the marketing we do. I have to make sure that somebody who knows how to write takes what I say and actually puts it into a format that they know is going to appeal more to the audience. Going back to you at the beginning of what you did, you started off in copy, and I just wondered if you could share how critical, how it's like a foundation stone, isn't it, to any campaign which is designed to engage with the customer.
It is. But remember this, that a great marketing campaign and a great brand is always underpinned by strategy. So in an advertising agency, there's basically three departments. There is the media department that buys buys the time in radio, television, and online. There's the account service department and planning that creates the strategy for the brand. And then there's the creative department that expresses that strategy creatively. So while writing, and a copywriter is in fact what an ad writer is called within the industry. A copywriter is teamed up with an art director, and they're given a strategy on a certain campaign, and then they're asked to come up with a selling idea that would express that strategy creatively in the form of a commercial. The writing, it's about simplicity. You mentioned that earlier, Bruce. It is so hard to be simple. It is so hard to come up with a really beautifully simple idea. It is the toughest task in marketing. And remember that marketers are usually faced with a very small constraint of space to work in. So a 30-second commercial is really only about 85 words. And a print ad can only contain so much content. And, a video is only 2 or 3 minutes long. Like, you have to be bold and interesting and creative and simple and clear. And you have to do all of that within a very compressed time. And that's the art of the copywriter.
Do you think, you're talking there that you're restricted in terms of time and space for the content, but let's just make an assumption here that budget wasn't the issue, and that actually you could have the whole center spread in the newspaper, or the amount of time you've got of somebody's attention. You say, well, the advert isn't 30 seconds, it's a full 10 minutes.
Yeah. So
in one way you go, well, yeah, from a lot of our listeners will go, well, yeah, we could produce pages and pages of content. Finding the balance, so you could, we've got lots of content, but if we've got lots of space, but if the content's not up to scratch, if you don't have consistently good content, whether it be 30 seconds or 10 minutes, the content, how well you write it, that's still the key point, isn't it?
It is. It's not even just the writing, it's the idea.
Yeah, the strategy is right. Yeah.
Well, it's not even this. The strategy is the underpinning, but it's the creative idea that really makes or breaks it. And really, when you're I'll even bring it way back, when you're a young copywriter trying to break into an advertising agency for the first time, looking for your first job, you put together a portfolio of about 24 ads that you dream up, and then you present those to a creative director, and they decide whether they want to hire you. But what a creative director is really looking for when he's looking at a writer's book is not so much how the writer can write as much as it is what is the kind of ideas that writer is capable of generating. And when they're looking at an art director's portfolio, they're thinking the same thing. They're not so much looking for art direction ability as they are looking for idea generating ability, because you can teach somebody to be a better writer, you can teach somebody to be a better art director, but you can't really teach them to generate ideas. That has to be an innate quality. So really, a great creative team, which is a writer and art director, really it's their idea generating ability that is everything.
One of the challenges that people face that will be listening to this show is that they're pretty much expected to do all of that. So, they're expected to come up with an internal communication campaign, which is not too dissimilar to coming up with a communication campaign, which is external focusing, different budgets. I think the external one, I know you said, budgets aren't necessarily always there from a marketing perspective, but, the budget to sell your product or service is very different to the internal comms budget to communicate with your employees. So often the challenge that a lot of our listeners will have is that they are the media buyer, in the sense that they have to go and get the organization to actually agree to have campaigns which take people away from the frontline responsibilities about, being productive and, serving the customer and developing the product. Yeah. They are the account and sort of strategy piece, and they're also asked to do the creative bit as well. To come up with the ideas, to try and write the copy, to maybe, I see lots of adverts where they're talking about, using various tools, for example.
So when I spent my initial years as a copywriter, I was lucky enough in one of my first jobs to really run into my mentor. It was a creative director I had early in my career who really taught me how to think about a brand. The way he looked at a brand, the way he could analyze a brand, the way he would, try and figure out how it fit into someone's life, what a competitor's impact would be on. All of that thinking was just an epiphany to me. It was just so extraordinary, and I've taken it with me my whole career. But a couple of years ago, I was just thinking about how fortunate I was to have all that knowledge imparted. Then I realized that there are so many companies in the world that don't have an advertising agency on speed dial, and they don't have the ability to sit in a boardroom with somebody like my creative director, and they have to wear all the hats in a company. So that's when that was the motivation for writing my last book, which is called This I Know, Lessons from Under the Influence, was really aimed at all those companies, small to medium companies, where they had to do everything. They have to come up with their own strategy. They have to come up with their own creative. They have to make the media buying decisions. And that's why I dedicated that book to those people, because I think there's more of those companies than there are big companies in the world.
For sure. Yeah.
And the very first chapter, I try to make that book a journey for somebody that they could really understand branding. And the very first chapter in that book, Bruce, is very interesting because I ask a question that's very hard to answer. And that is, what business are you really in? And the reason I ask that is it's the fundamental question that has to be answered by a company if they're doing their own marketing. And that is, Heineken isn't really in the beer business, they're in the party business. And Michelin's not in the tire business, they're in the safety business. And Apple's not in the computer business, they're in the empowerment business. You have to understand what people are really buying from you, and it's never the product. It's the benefit of the product. And that's where all your marketing should come from. But until you can answer that question, your marketing will always be fuzzy.
And do you think that's why the larger organizations bring in sort of third parties like yourself, in the sense of they maybe can't see the wood for the trees around their product? It's
objectivity. So really what an agency offers a client is in fact objectivity. They become the general public. In other words, they take the public's view of what the product is, always keeping the customer as the central focus. Because as a manufacturer or as a company or as a product, your nose is too close to the glass. Yeah. You're looking from the wrong end of the telescope. So what an agency brings to a client is objectivity. Now, when you're doing it all yourself, you have no objectivity. Mm-hmm. And that's always the dangerous thing, that you have to remember that you are lacking objectivity. So that's why you have to really talk to your customers to maintain that outside feel of what do they say about you when you're not in the room.
Yeah. A lot of my work, a lot of my research over the last 7.5 years has been about understanding behaviors and how behaviors are sort of, I guess, formed and influenced. And I see, part of that's been driven through, when I looked at it from a marketing perspective, how do you tick the odds in your favor that somebody will choose to buy your product or service and to keep buying it, that type of stuff. One of the things within the part of understanding that behavioral science perspective is how people look for, it's called confirmation bias. It's, people look amongst all the data and everything that's been presented, and they'll look for the stuff which confirms their pre-existing perception, in this case, of what the customer thinks.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. Most of the people who will read a car ad are the people who have just bought that car. And the reason they're doing that, Bruce, is exactly what you're talking about. They're looking for confirmation on that big purchase.
Yeah. They go, I pat myself on the back. I bought that car. It's great.
Yeah. And just reminding yourself about why you did buy that car. So confirmation is really an important thing in marketing, is to really assure people that they're making the right decision for them and that there's reasons to buy a product. That's what comes down to differentiation. Why this brand? You've got so many brands to choose from. Let's stay with the car business for a minute. you've got Ford and Chevrolet and GM and Peugeot and all these brands, and then you've got multiple cars within those brands. What is the right one for me? That's the question marketing answers.
So I think on that final bit of wisdom that you've just shared with us there, I'd really like to thank you. It's been everything I thought it would be and more.
My pleasure. I could talk about this subject all day, and the questions were terrific, so I really enjoyed it, Bruce.
Now, I really do hope you got as much as I did from that conversation I just had with Terry there. I'm sure that you would join me in thanking him for taking the time out on his holiday as well to come and share his insights with everybody here on the show. Now, if you find those type of insights interesting, if maybe you've listened to other episodes and you're sort of like, generally excited and think, hey, do you know what? There's a lot here that I could potentially be applying. And you want to know how you can get maybe some shortcuts to those insights, not just to the insights, but maybe some help and guidance to your particular situation, then how can you go about accessing that? Well, the good news is that after 7.5 years of the research, but also applying this research now in organizations from as big as 100,000 over 24 countries down to organizations with just 30 members of staff, then I can help you, and I can help you through a range of courses that I deliver, which are currently face-to-face courses, but also in 3 months' time, we'll also have a range of online courses available as well. But also I have a coaching and mentoring program to help, take what you learn and be able to embed that within your own organization and tackle specific challenges that you are facing around awareness, behavior, and culture. So if you're interested in those type of insights, accessing, my know-how and my own experience of applying everything that I've learned in the last 7.5 years, plus all my experience in governance, risk, and compliance over the last 20 years, my God, 20 years time, then how can you best go about accessing that? Well, drop me an email at bruce.hallas@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. That's it. Drop me an email at bruce.hallas, Hallas, at re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. So who is the next great guest we have on the show for you? Well, the next guest is a lady by the name of Prudence Smith. Now, Prudence comes from an organization that often I speak about as a great example of forward thinking around the challenges about the human factor. And Prudence has been a core part of making that vision, but also bringing it to life. But really interestingly, before she actually joined this particular organization, she has some very, very interesting experience around the whole behavioral side of things as well, within the context of some pretty leading edge organizations. And so it's been great to have her on the show. I'm really sure that you'll get a lot from listening to her, sharing her insights. So it'll be great to have you join us here on the show in a week's time. In the meantime, keep safe and take care of yourself. Many thanks for joining us.